Well, good morning, everyone on Zoom. Good morning, everyone here. Hold on. Sorry.
You're going to be showing eating?
Will you pray with me, please? And we'll get started. Holy Spirit, we're gathered together this morning as your church. We confess that our vision and our energies are limited, but what we have, we give to you. Please shape our hearts and guide our hands and our imaginations, that we might be part of the work that you are already doing in and through the people of Portland Mennonite Church. Amen. Well, good morning, everyone. This is going to be part 2 of a conversation or a report out that I started 2 weeks ago about the Reimagining Church questionnaire. And so to do kind of a little intro, I'm going to have Sarah play a video that's been on the website for a little bit, introducing the project, just as an overview of what's going on. So I'm going to do this.
Hello there. My name is Dave Johnson, and I'm a member of Portland Mennonite and a student in Anabaptist Mennonite Biblical Seminary's Master of Divinity program. This semester, I'm taking a course called Ministry in Church and World, and a significant part of my work for this class is a project I'm calling Reimagining Church for a New Normal. This includes a questionnaire designed to collect our congregational thoughts about church here in Portland and now at the beginning of the 2020s. I hope you'll fill it out. If writing short answers isn't your bag, but you'd still like to be part of the conversation, you can just skip to the end of the questionnaire and indicate your interest in being part of a small group discussion. But Dave, you might be asking, and some of you have, why do you keep saying new normal? What does that even mean? Aren't we always adapting and changing? Isn't ongoing personal and community transformation an essential part of our faith formation? Those are great questions. You should be deeply satisfied. Gold stars all around. Here's what I mean. In addition to our ongoing process of transformation, as well as general adaptation to changes in our lives, we form habits and develop assumptions about how things should be done and why that often go unexamined. These are what we think of, or more accurately, don't think of, as normal. This isn't necessarily a bad thing. Part of why we try to build good habits as individuals is so we don't have to spend so much emotional and mental energy trying to decide to do the right thing every day. For example, early in the pandemic, I decided I wanted to go for an early morning walk every day with my dog, Burley. Now, 2 years later, I don't think about whether I'm going to do it anymore. I just wake up, put on my walking pants, and head out the door. It's become more than a thing that I do. It's become part of who I am. I've become an early morning dog walker. This practice that has become a habit is a good thing in and of itself, but it is also for other things. It gets me into our neighborhood and nature every day. It results in incremental changes to me, a healthier body, a quieter mind, a deeper connection to my neighborhood and the people and other creatures who live here with me. All of this has become part of my new normal. In a sermon last fall, Rod quoted the poet, author, and activist Sonia Renee Taylor about the idea of normal. She writes, "Our pre-corona existence was never normal, other than we normalized greed, inequity, exhaustion, depletion, extraction, disconnection, confusion, rage, hoarding, hate, and lack. We should not long to return, my friends. We are being given the opportunity to stitch a new garment, one that fits all of humanity and nature." The pandemic disrupted many of our habits as a society, and it revealed what is essential and who is vulnerable, and we've been confronted with how often those overlap. It also, of course, disrupted our habits of
Oh,
church. And in so doing, it gives us an opportunity to examine our practices and assumptions about the what, the how, and the why of church. What is church? And what could it be? What have we discovered that is essential? And what have we learned that we can leave behind?
Calculate my AA quarterly.
Eventually, our individual and collective practices and assumptions about church that emerge out of this time will become our new habits, our new way of being together, our new status quo. And these habits will either move forward God's redemptive work of justice and peace, or they won't. At least, that's the idea. Maybe all this talk about a new normal just isn't that compelling to you. That's totally okay. But maybe it sparks some new ideas. I hope you'll share them.
That was my cartoon.
Now, we're about to meet a man who has millions of fans all around the world. He's a social media.
Okay. Did that make it go away? All right. That's nice.
3 years ago.
Nope. Please don't do that. No, please don't do that. No, it's my okay. We all set? I think we're all set. Stop. Sorry, everyone. Okay. So that was a little bit of an overview of the project as a whole, why we're doing this, what we hope to, what I guess the intent is to accomplish. In 2 weeks ago, we also talked a little bit about how I've been structuring the feedback that I've been receiving from the questionnaire around this kind of 3 B's of religious identity formation. So this idea of our belonging, the groups we belong to, are both consciously and unconsciously held beliefs, and our behaviors, the things that we do. All of those things kind of that's okay. All of these things interact together in order to form our religious identities. 2 weeks ago, we talked about belief, and we answered, and I reported back on these 4 questions. What causes you to worry? What perceptions of God have been challenged or changed? How your notion of church has changed, and what gives you hope? So just like as an overview, this is kind of my worry cloud, our worry cloud actually, for the perceptions of God that have changed or challenged. Most people wrote back that they hadn't. People talked about how difficult it is to hope during this time, that God seems elusive, less present. The people are discouraged by, and this came up a lot, the sort of polarization was a big worry, but that was particularly disconcerting when it came to the polarization among people who say they believe, or who believe in God. And then, but many people had a greater sense of God's presence. Our notions of church, I don't think these necessarily changed, but most of them were reinforced, that it's a community and not a building or a thing that we do just on Sundays. People realized how much they needed to sing together, to be together, that gathering online, but also that gathering online or in person is sort of incidental. Many people's notions of church didn't change during these last couple of years. That online church, we realize that is insufficient. That seeking the peace of the city is core to our understanding of church, but also that church needs to change in order to continue to meet its calling. I wonder if I can move this. My cursor is just gone, so I'm not sure I can take that little thing away. What gives you hope? Our dedication to the peaceable kingdom. PMC's how we love and care for each other, our openness to learning and change, our faithfulness to the way of Jesus, how we've continued to persevere over these last 2 years, and our generational diversity. And then this is our hope cloud. Is Ed here? So, so one person said that Ed Shirk was why they felt hope. So he shows up in the hope cloud. He also showed up in the other survey that I sent out last week that many of you filled out that I never explained to Ed, like, why he is so prominently referenced. So I should send him an email. So today, let me see, maybe if I can move this up here. No, it is. It's
There. Yeah, that's a little better.
yeah.
Switch to the top. It's picking up your.
It's picking up my stuff. Yeah. I don't know how to fix that. Okay. Today we're going to talk about belonging and behavior. And I'm going to talk first about belonging, and I'm going to report back on the survey that many of you filled out. The most recent one on our history with church in general, and then our more specific history with Mennonites and Portland Mennonite in particular. So I asked an age question because Gail pointed out last 2 weeks ago that we were the folks who were coming to this particular forum represented a fairly narrow band of demographics in Portland Mennonite. So I wanted to kind of quantify that. And this is sort of what it looked like. There was the overwhelming percentage of folks are over 45, who that means, so I'm like the cutoff. I'm 44. Everyone else who's younger than that is young person. But I'm actually gonna so when I report out on some of the things around what is essential for church in particular, I call out those people who are younger that filled out that survey, just to kind of get it so that those voices are sort of more prominently raised. So for our church history, let me see, did I want to talk about this? I think I did. Yeah, so the reason why I ask these questions is because we're having these conversations about what church is. And I wanted to show that even though I wanted to show us a little bit of a picture of everything, all of our past experiences that we were bringing to that conversation about what church is, who God is, how God is or isn't working in the world, just so that we can, because I think that I was interested and surprised by some of these results, and I'm assuming that other people will be too. And I think that what I'm hoping is that as we're having these conversations, particularly about what's essential or about things that we have done in the past, our traditions that might be like that we could think about leaving behind, that not everybody has the same relationship to being a Mennonite. Not everybody has the same relationship to church or to PMC. So that's a little bit of, I think it's interesting, but it's also that kind of context about like when we bring our imaginations and our empathy to this conversation, to have to not be judgmental if you think something is dumb that we do that just isn't working for you, but also to be less protective of some of these things and understand like where people are coming from. So that's why I asked these. So the first one is the faith tradition. So they're broadly defined. You guys aren't gonna be able to see the top of this. Let me see if I can move this somewhere else. Good grief. Go back. I know, but I can't see my cursor. My computer's so old. Maybe I'll do it down here.
Can you just hit that little line? Oh, it
Maybe.
disappeared. There, you see that? Or you can minimize that guy. Oh no.
This is such a bummer. Okay. Yeah.
It's his gallery.
It's just okay. So Protestantism is I think probably obviously most represented, but lots of other religious traditions. So, and for all of these, when I don't put a percentage, it meant that people could select more than one thing. So like for me, I'm represented here on Protestantism and agnosticism, spiritual, not religious. I think that I would imagine, I mean, some people, it was Protestantism and that's it. And that's cool too. But that's sort of why that is. Okay, sorry. So the Protestant denominations, I wanted to just call that out in particular. What was interesting is that when the question was, what Protestant denominations have been part of your faith or spiritual journey at any point in your life, not everyone put Anabaptism. So, but there are lots of different things. And when I ask about, the next question is asking about how you identify now. There are a lot of slashes, like I'm an Anabaptist Lutheran or an Anabaptist, and I have but I still maintain a lot of my Catholic roots. So this is that. So if I went back and forth about how to present this information, because if I took everything that was Anabaptist or Mennonite and put that all into one group, that's the vast majority, well over 90%. But I think that it's important. I think understanding how people self-identify as a believer, I think is really important. When talking to someone who identifies as Anabaptist first, I think that to me, that actually means a little bit something different than someone who says that they identify with Mennonite Church USA, which feels more institutional. I don't know if that's what they meant, but that's what I heard when I was reading these things. 6 people said just Portland Mennonite. So here is, let me see. I did this was fun. These are all the churches that we've gone to. This is 43 people. So these are the churches that 43 people said had been an important part of their faith journey. And the bottom part that you can't see has more. I did a little bit of counting. So there are 49 different Mennonite churches represented on here from 18 different states. There are. Yeah, it was just, so the question was like a church that has been important to your faith journey. So that was that. I mean, I've been part of this church for 10 years. This was my first sort of Mennonite experience. That's amazing to me. I don't have that relationship with the Mennonite faith. And I think that's, I think part of the exercise in understanding who we are and what we're bringing to this, I think that's important as we continue these conversations. So these weren't just Mennonite churches, but people have gone to churches in at least 6 different countries: Belgium, Zambia, El Salvador, US, Canada, and South Africa. That's kind of cool. Yeah, okay. So the next section is going to be our Mennonite history. So looking a little bit deeper into that. So if you can't see, and he's not even here, it is recorded. Okay. So this question was I was asking what generation of Mennonite you were. I think the little purple one right down there at the bottom where you can't see the number is your parents were Mennonites. I can't even see it on mine. Let me see if I can move. 18%. Oh, can I get all the way? Okay.
Almost.
Here's what I think is important about this is that well over a third of the people who just filled out this survey, so people who are super interested in PMC in general, so we're already sort of have some sample bias, have chosen to be a Mennonite instead of being born into being a Mennonite. And I think, and I'm not saying that being born into a Mennonite doesn't mean that you continue to have to make a choice. But making that choice is you just bring a different history and a connection to the faith tradition than if your grandparents are Mennonite, or one person wrote that as far back as they could go. they had Mennonite ancestors. I grew up in a church that was non-denominational, whose founding pastor I knew, and there was no connection to anything else. Like I love that part of, I love my class in Anabaptist history and theology. I thought that was great. I like knowing about this stuff. I like being connected to that experience. I love the mix of people who have a deep generational connection to this faith tradition and people who are coming to it because they are compelled by it and have chosen to do this thing that's kind of weird, you know? I mean, Mennonites, people who hear that I'm a Mennonite, who don't know what a Mennonite is, bring all sorts of sort of weird ideas to it, you know? So you have to kind of like, if you're new to it, you have to overcome that and then commit. So I don't know. Let's see. Did you go? So I'm in seminary right now in Mennonite school. So 25 didn't go. The three people answered that they had gone to grade school. 5 people had answered they had gone to high school. 15 people had gone to a Mennonite college, and 4 had gone to a Mennonite seminary. So I don't know. That's just another thread to connect you to this. How long have you been part of PMC's congregation? I asked a question about how long, if you had been a member. I actually ended up not liking that question because that creates a distinction in people who I know aren't members who are as committed to this church as anyone who's been here 25 years or more. So we have a couple, I think it was just one person who filled out the survey who came and started attending PMC during the pandemic. All these other like 3 to 5, 6 to 10, and 11 to 15, those are all about the same percentage. And then just a lot, like the biggest group was more than 20 years old, or 20 years that had, I mean, that was filling out this survey, but that's remarkable. So, but this is another, I actually want to talk about a little bit about this too. Because in the next part of this conversation, there's just like more things that are coming up blocking it.
We need to take a collection.
I don't know. Crystalline would say yes. I have a really nice desktop at home. Yeah, it works great. So here's what I want to say about this, because I've been thinking about tradition, like these 2 questions in particular, like what's essential and what can we leave? What have we learned that we could leave behind? And people who have been coming for 5 years or fewer, 10 years, even 10 years or fewer, are gonna like think about that differently. There was a time when I was going to a church, and if the answer to why do we do it this way was some form of because that's just what we do, or it's tradition, I would have dismissed it out of hand. Like if that's the only reason you can give me, that's not enough. I actually have changed my mind about that quite a bit. There's a poet, he's a late Irish poet named John O'Donoghue, who wrote about tradition, something that I think is compelling. He says, "I've always thought that tradition is to the community what memory is to the individual. If you lose your memory, you wake up in the morning, you don't know who you are, where you are, what ground you're standing on. And if you lose your tradition, it's the same thing." So that's a optimistic understanding of tradition. And he like complicates it a little bit, right, when he says within the Christian tradition and within, Mennonite history in particular, there are dark zones of complete horror. But there are also zones of great light and immense wells of refreshment and healing. And I think it's a critical question in all of us, for anyone who wants to have a mature, adult, open-ended, good-hearted, critical faith, to conduct the most vigorous and relentless conversation that you can have with your own tradition. I think that we're doing that right now. I think that that's difficult work. But when we are, like I said, when we are having these conversations about what we can't leave behind, what we can't do without, or what we think isn't important, to remember that people are like, that people who say, this has just been part of my life for the last 50 years, please don't take it away. Like, we need to bring empathy to that question. But we also need to, we can't, but if the response is just, well, that's what we've always done, we have to bring empathy to the folks who say, well, that's not enough. I need more than that. This didn't start from nothing. So with that, oh, one more thing. So this was fun too. These are all the things that just the 43 people who filled out the survey have done in their life with PMC. Just a huge amount of effort. Like, this was not reflected in the faith tradition I grew up in. I'm like a huge fan of PMC because of things like this, where people like show up and do the work, and are just sitting and consuming church. Yes.
Can you tell people where to find the questionnaire? Is it still available?
So I only sent that's a really good question. I only sent the questionnaire to the people who responded to I sent the second survey to the people who responded to the first survey who had given me their email, because I wanted to get a sense of what that feedback meant from a sort of background perspective. So if you submitted that survey and gave me your email address, you have it in your inbox somewhere. If you're not, I didn't send it to you. And it's not because I don't care. It's just because it was like within the data that I was trying to collect. That was who I was interested in hearing from.
So what was this question?
So what have you done? Like, there was how have you served in the work and worship of PMC? And this was another one where you could answer multiple, and many people did. So yeah.
What percentage of people then responded against?
So almost 85% of the people that I sent it to, 85% of the people responded with this. So this is, I mean, I don't know. I'm not a statistician, but that feels pretty representative. They don't teach stats at seminary. All right. So now, with all that as background, we're going to move on to, there are 3 questions that we're going to talk about around behavior. I've sort of been alluding to them. So with the first one, when you think about church, what is essential to your sense of collective identity? When you, are there things, the second one, are there things you've discovered that we can do without and that we can leave behind? And then briefly, I collected a list of personal practices that people have engaged in during this, the lockdown in particular, that were life-giving to them and might be useful to others. So what is essential? All right, I'm gonna have to, I will read these since this is, point my mouth toward the microphone. All right. So the most referenced one was, this first list, these are the top 10 by the number of times that they were mentioned in the survey. 63 people, I guess, for background. Also, just as a reminder, this was all open field, so everyone had to think about this and put it down. They weren't selecting from a list. So the 10 things that were most referenced: we follow Jesus, we love the way that God loves, we're committed to peace and justice, we seek the peace of our city, we practice, we sing together, we bear one another's burdens, we are welcoming, we're multi-generational, we practice communal discernment, and let me see if I can, no, it's a mystery. No, go back. Okay. And a 10th one. So these were, but there, so those were all of those were identified by, I think the bottom one was like 7 or 8 people. Like, so there was a lot of energy around all of those. Some other ideas that all were, I thought, great, but didn't garner as much mentions. We celebrate together. We work for racial justice. We have a Mennonite or Anabaptist identity. We're generous. We're connected to the neighborhood. We're continually learning and adapting. We practice communal rituals. We confess and repent and forgive. We go to Wildwood and Twin Rocks. And I do know what the bottom one is. It's we eat pie. So. I think it might have been 2 like that, which is remarkable. So these next, I think 4 or 5 slides are quotes from the younger folks. So people who are younger than me. There were 5. So these were the things that they put forward, that what is essential, and they are so the last few are long, but I think they're all interesting. So we bear one another's burdens and we prefer the needs of the weakest among us. Our capacity to be vulnerable, to have the courage to orient ourselves to Jesus's ethic of active and subversive love. We're actively involved in doing things for others in our community. That's what I hold on to about my church family and about Mennonites from growing up. We work together and do the things that are needed. It isn't complicated or fancy, but we meet needs, which I really like. I think that sort of Mennonites, we're not complicated or fancy. Be a good t-shirt. This one is, my spiritual goal in life is to connect with other humans to the extent to which I can bring about radical care, social justice, and resource equity for others. I find Jesus' teachings and actions useful in the understanding of how I might go about doing that. I think living this way should be a part of one's daily life and not relegated to just Sunday morning and religious-based institutions. I'm going to guess at that top one. I feel at home at PMC because the message is consistently about love. I grew up hearing about my sin and how to seek forgiveness. Not that these things aren't important, but the amount of time spent on the topic made them feel like they were the climax of faith. I love the verse where Jesus says that what's the most important. With utter clarity, he said it was love. It follows then that everything ought to be viewed through that lens. How do we love our community, our grieving friends, our youth, ourselves? This is an essential part of the PMC community, and I pray it never changes. And then this last one. So a lot of the comments and feedback I got on this particular question were about more conceptual than like actions. Actually, this last one is about like 3 specific actions. All right. So this person identified 3 different things that are essential to their understanding of church. And so simple living. I don't necessarily think we do great at simple living, but I think it's essential. And then rejecting, it's a list of like bigger homes, more money, fancier cars, things that distract us from God. I feel this is part of our witness. The tricky thing is to find a balance between the simplicity legalism of the Mennonites' past and a complete lack of guidance that turns into nothing. Is that sort of okay? And this person is a generational Mennonite. So they're, and I think you can see that in the quote. They're bringing some of the, like a history of struggling with the ban, or like the ways that Mennonites have tried to communicate that witness by controlling the decisions of members, and finding that balance will historically always be difficult. Pacifism. We need to continually tell the stories that reinforce that we are willing to lose status, money, and power to protest violence. And then here's one that I think is interesting. And I'd be curious if there are comments on this. Community. In-person community, the sharing of joys and trials, support when needed, etc., is largely related to size. PMC is too big to be one church. It's at least 2 churches, if not 3. I know people that have gone here for years, but don't feel plugged in. And I think that is largely a function of a lack of potlucks and avenues into small group participation. I think long-term, religious-focused small groups are essential. I think clusters, subgroups of maybe 100 people that have potlucks once a month are a great way to do that. So I'm just curious in general, if there are any thoughts about like what is essential, if what is essential to you is reflected in what I've been reporting in this particular part of it. Or if you have like specific comments about like this in particular. Oh,
Those are just about the questionnaire.
okay. Yeah. Oh.
Yeah, this is David Holcomb, and I was actually thinking exactly number 3 after the meeting last Sunday at the park. I don't know how many people were there, but it was a small enough size that, and the context was such so that you could actually spend time talking and getting to know people better. Whereas a gathering on a Sunday morning here tends to be, at least pre-COVID, there are too many people to really try to connect unless you've been around for a long time and you have those specific connections. So I really like this idea. I don't know what that would look like for how we could live that out, but I think there's something not just about small groups, but about medium-sized groups where you can have relationships. They're not deep necessarily, but it's a place of connection and you know you belong. Whereas if you're in a congregation of 250 and you don't really have those connections, you don't really feel like you belong. So I think both the small group, but also this medium-sized group is really important.
Thank you. Anyone else? Is there? Yes. Hi, Jenna.
I was just going to say agreeing, but I also want to say there's something in my thinking about Sunday morning that's different than a potluck. So you come in, there's a certain expectation of how we act on a Sunday morning and how much time we have to interact with each other, where a whole different event like a potluck, my brain's in a different space. I'm there just to visit and talk and whatever. So sometimes I think it's not just the smaller group, it's actually what you're there for or what your expectation of the event is. So can I switch my Sunday morning expectations and behaviors to be more potluck-like?
This is Colleen. I think for me, the line there where they say people have gone for years, yes, Harold, people have gone for years but don't necessarily feel plugged in. I found it, I was welcomed at PMC. I always felt welcome, but I didn't know how to plug in. And it's still something I'm trying to unpack in my mind. Like, how do you get involved? Like, how do you, where must you be asked to be part of something? And how does that happen? So I think that to me is still a, we were talking about, it tends to be a lot of the same people who volunteer on stuff. But in my experience, it was like, I was clueless to know how to volunteer. Like, is there like a magic ritual of like some point somebody's going to ask you? And that's how I did get involved.
I know years ago, we used to do a talent survey and it was made available for everyone. I know in general, I think people sometimes are reticent to volunteer. That's not a very, I think people that come to PMC in general tend to be on the scale of introverts. They're on the introverted side and they prefer to be asked and invited. But we did do a survey and that I think maybe helped people who are feeling like, I don't know where to plug in, but it gave them a list of things that they could put their name down if they were interested.
Yeah.
This is Gloria. Of course, I have something to say as always. There's a book called How We Meet and Why It Matters. I can't remember the author, but I went out and actually bought it and I haven't finished it yet, but I think that when we're talking about when we come on Sunday morning, it's one thing. And when we go to the park for potluck, it's another. I think this book is fabulous. And I think it's critical reading as we think about other ways that we might meet together. So I would highly recommend it. And you can Google it, How We Meet and Why It Matters.
So I'll say, as someone who I think is one of the newer members actually in this room, that I was asked when we first started coming. Rachel Rachel was just really good at that. Like we went to a first of all, they had us over for dinner. And got to know us a little bit, and then she said, "Hey, you should do adult Christian ed committee." So that was really important for me. I think that with the sort of unstructured time that we've been talking about with the potlucks outside in particular, or Twin Rocks in particular, like that unlocked PMC for Crystalline and I. Like we had been coming for 2 or 3 years, kind of sitting off to the side. Knew a couple people. I'd been going to a book group, but that Twin Rocks experience, like that changed our life. I mean, it is not overstating it to say it changed our lives when we decided to go to that. And that, Gloria, to make Gail, to your point about like introverts versus extroverts, like that was a hard decision for us because we didn't know anybody very well, and we were just prepared to be uncomfortable the whole weekend. And it was never that we were unwelcome. We felt very welcome. We felt welcome here the moment we walked in the door. But there was a point at which that for us personally, we had to make that decision that we were going to be vulnerable and give it a try. But those unstructured moments, like for up until just recently, really, like that it doesn't happen very often at church. Like it is Twin Rocks, which is a weekend away and all that entails with that, where I think some of the things that we're learning about just in these last few months with the Thanksgiving thing and the spring break thing at the park is that you can have these conversations, and it doesn't have to be with everybody. I sat down with Carolyn Scott for the first time, and I've gone to church with her for however long. I don't know that I ever would have been able to talk to her as long as I had if we hadn't gone to the park. So I think that there's something important here for us. So, Allison has a comment in the chat. So I'm going to read it for everybody. It says, "When I first came to PMC, I was invited to come to the knitting group, and that invitation prompted me to join. I see that still happening, though there are fewer activities." Yeah, I mean, like book group for me was a big deal. Like it was a sort of affinity group where I could be comfortable in the activity. And get to know people. So, all right. Anybody else? That was fun.
Oh, Jonathan's
Nope.
got something. Hang on. Yeah, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Oh, yay.
Okay.
Bombs.
Thanks for doing this, Dave. I think part of what you're talking about is where those medium-sized groups come in. I mean, when you look at a big church of 250 or whatever, the idea of volunteering yourself for something, it's like, well, there's plenty of people that lead music. There's plenty of people that do all these things. There's all these committees, and we know that PMC is a place where people are involved. Maybe that's not my spot. And if you go clear down to the small group size, it's like, well, it's a pretty small group. There's not a whole lot that needs to happen. And maybe someone finds out something about someone, but they're not connected to the people that would like, hey, this person should be tapped for something. And it's those medium-sized groups where you're interacting with people who maybe not in the same way as like a short-term focus group where it's like everyone is already interested in the same thing, but more of those encounters with things that I like about Portland Mennonite Church, where you get people of different ages, different backgrounds, different perspectives, and you come together and there's enough structure that you kind of have a common spot to start from with the conversation or a game or meal, but yet it's not so focused that people are afraid to answer. And that's a great way to get to know people and get people involved. I know the past few years have been particularly hard to get people together in those medium-sized groups. But we did remodel the basement, and I've heard a lot of things about food, and Jesus talks about, when you break bread together. One thing that quickly came to my mind was that if we wanted subgroups of maybe 100 people, there could be a A, B, C, and D group. And, there could be 4 potlucks a month at PMC with 4 different groups of 100 people. And if there's 100 people at a potluck, I also feel more comfortable sitting and staying at a table because I'm not worried about the people who are still waiting in line, needing a spot to sit and jump up. The flip side of that being, for positive or negative, you have 4 times as many people that you want, involved in kitchen committee. Because it'd be nice if people that are doing the cleanup for one could actually sit and eat at the other. But that also then creates an open space for people to get involved in, hey, once a month, can you help with some dishes? You help with dishes on the second Sunday. On the third Sunday, you come and, you don't even have to bring a meal because you're doing dishes the other time. Just a thought.
No, I think that's a great thought. And it is a good segue into the next conversation that I want to have around what.
One other comment with that.
Oh yeah.
Just the thought of regularly having things happen. I know sometimes when people come, it's like, oh, well, the welcome lunch will be like in, a month at this person's house. And if somebody comes and they're like, pretty much any Sunday that you come, there's a potluck. Maybe they don't want on their first Sunday, but they're like, oh, there's another one next week. I can just come next week. And then they get connected to that, that subgroup, just in terms of helping people that move from that feeling welcomed, but not sure how to get involved, to have an activity they can directly get involved with and talk with some people.
Thank you, Jonathan. Yeah, I think the idea of finding more ways to connect with each other in a unstructured, not sermon, like they're just, when Crystal and I come, it's a little easier now because they're a little older, but like before pandemic, Becca was 8 and Sadie was 6, and we were just trying to not have them like annoy everybody too much. And so there's what felt like there's very little we could do to kind of connect with folks that we didn't already know. So like finding these opportunities. The reason why I think that what Jonathan had to say leads into the what can be released section is because we had let me gather this a little bit. So when we shut down with the pandemic, one of the biggest sense of relief for our family is that we could stop doing a bunch of stuff. Like it was a relief because we were overcommitted and we didn't have the time and the energy and the attention to do all of the things that we were doing very well. But we were committed to these activities. We loved the people who were involved in these activities. It felt like such a loss to say no, that when we got this kind of like guilt-free get out of jail card, we grabbed it. The reason I think that churches can can get into a similar pattern. And the reason why I asked this question is because when we're putting together the agenda for the table meeting every month, there is so much going on. We hardly talk about anything that's going on. And part of that's okay, because it's I think an intentionally decentralized decision-making community. Like not everything has to run through the table. Just cast your bread upon the waters and we'll see what happens. But I also think that if we're going to do something like what Jonathan says, which is like multiply the number of potlucks that we have by orders of magnitude, really, like that we would have to release ourselves of doing other things in order to continue to be a healthy, functioning church, or we're not going to we don't have the time and capacity and people power probably to do that. So that's why I asked the question. This was actually, I think, a really hard question for people to answer, and not very many people did. So this is I'm gonna skip this. It's a really good quote. It's about, so this is idea is that like when we think about what we are involved in as people, that it's like in how we want to relate to the church. It's not just about like what our individual interests are. It's about connecting to what the community is doing and having that like sort of almost subjecting yourself to what the community is doing and having, like it says at the bottom, that understanding PMC as my outreach and mission headquarters, as where I'm fed and feeling encouraged spiritually. So you're really like the community is helping guide your efforts and how we're working and worshiping in the world. So so these were the things that we discovered we can do without. The most referenced things were in-person church is not the only way to worship. That didn't actually mean Zoom most of the time. It meant Wildwood and the Thanksgiving potluck at the park and some of these other things. I don't know if you noticed, but on the chart with where people were serving at PMC, most people were in committees. And so it was not surprising to me that people thought that we could do without in-person committee meetings. Because that takes a lot of time and energy. Many people said that they could do without a lot, like that there's a lot going on, that the sort of their essentials of what church is a pretty, it's community that's worshiping together. But there were just a number of people like, I like everything. So other ideas. Some people thought we could just do ad hoc committees altogether. That was funny. The formalities of membership. So these weren't referenced by a ton of people, maybe one or two, but I think that they're interesting to think about. Passing the offering was actually mentioned by multiple people. Fancy polished worship services. There were a couple, like within that, this idea that we need to dress up on Sundays, and then an emphasis on our Mennonite identity, that we could release that. So let's see. So any, I don't know, maybe I'll go back. Any thoughts about what we can release ourselves from? Mm-hmm. So I don't know if you can hear that Zoom, but both Gloria and Vivian commented on that needing to be tied into our Mennonite history is important and not something that they're interested in leaving behind. I'm more curious about, I don't know, and maybe this is people need more time to think about it, but this idea that we can't do everything, that our time and that we are finite people with limited amount of time, and if there are there things, now that you've seen some of what people have referenced, that you at least would consider thinking about not doing as often or as at all?
Hey, this is Sarah, and I'm behind the camera, so folks on Zoom can't see me, but a couple of things. One, I think we need to release the grief that we are a large enough community that you aren't always going to, like if we go back to 2 worship services, you just aren't going to see people. If we have subgroups where, we're having those subgroups are meeting, then you're just not going to always see these people. And I think we have to give that grief up, because we recognize that meeting all together all at once doesn't actually serve people, and doesn't actually build community, because it's easy to lose people then. So we have to be willing to give up that, to work through that grief and let it go.
we just have a couple more minutes. So I'm going to do these last couple slides. So I asked a question about personal practices that had been life-giving to you as you struggled through the pandemic. Actually, so I have a document of these that I printed out and intended to print out multiple copies for folks. But if you send me an email, I'll send it to you. Also, if you want your responses to that initial questionnaire, I know I promised a couple people that, but I didn't do that. So an email about that would be great too. So these are the most referenced personal practices that people clung to during or incorporated into their lives during the pandemic, and especially during the quarantine. Prayer, reading was a big deal for us Mennonites. Staying connected to friends and family over Zoom, keeping active daily devotions, and staying connected with your small group. Those were that's what you said. So, yeah.
Lori has a comment in the chat.
Okay, Lori says, one idea, if two services have Sunday school in between and once per month, replace Sunday school with a brunch potluck. I like that idea. Beckett and Sadie, if they equated church with brunch food, would be members for life. So, I am curious. I don't know if we have anyone who can sort of bring this particular perspective of folks. I mean, of families who are with kids who you're kind of like trying to figure out how to keep church meaningful and a relevant part of their identity, and what would need is what we're doing right now doing that? And if not, what do you have any ideas about what that would look like? That's in 3 minutes. Are you gonna do it, David? Okay.
Yeah, I don't think what we're doing now meets our kids' needs, but I don't know what it would be. They both went, both Claire and Lucy went to the MYF gathering this weekend. And so that was really good that they went to the MYF gathering, but I'm not sure on an ongoing basis, but maybe you have great ideas that I don't.
We do try really hard to hold a lot of expectations lightly and to talk about like on a really practical level, what benefits of being part of a supportive community, and you know how church, how a religion is a framework to organize your life with, you know, within and out through. So we kind of have these really general discussions with our kids, and then give them space. But it also means that they're often just sleeping on Sunday morning.
The church I grew up in, a non-denominational church, made a lot of mistakes, and I wouldn't hold them up as an example. But the one thing they did right was they gave me multiple opportunities to participate in really meaningful ways. You know, like I remember preaching my first sermon, whatever, I can't imagine sitting through it, but you know, when I was 16 or 17 and you know, just all kinds of things like that. So, and it was quite meaningful to me that they trusted me enough to allow me to make stupid mistakes up in, you know, in situations like that.
I'll echo some of what was said with, especially pre-pandemic, it being a spot that the girls recognized and interacted with adults that were not relatives, and that there were specific adults in the congregation that they would, we'd get there and they'd be like, oh, where's so-and-so sitting? Can we sit by this person this Sunday? Or where's so-and-so sitting? Can we sit by this person? That was one way that it is meeting a need for kids. And then also echoing the part of opportunities to get involved when the kids are asked to do things, whether it's to read or be part of singing, or those two things, just having grownups that they're connected to and feeling like they're part of it has been good.
This is Colleen. I think growing up in South Africa, church was where you could connect with people fighting apartheid. It was something real that you were worried about your country and you could do something. And I saw it here, like for youth who got involved in the Black Lives Matter protest, or something very real and practical we can do on climate stuff, or the houselessness, whether, something concrete like volunteering with Habitat or something. But I found, like, as a teenager, what kept me at church was there was stuff really bugging me, and church gave me an avenue to do something. And that was huge. It was like my faith was real. Most kids just whined, but we could do something.
We're at time. I want to thank you for how you've participated in this so far, both with the questions that you've responded to, and then these conversations these last couple weeks. Next steps, I think that there might be another one of these happening at the end of the month. Another class. There will be some form of this ongoing conversation at the retreat at Twin Rocks over Mother's Day weekend, and then over the next I would say 4 to 6 weeks. Like my work will be putting together this into some sort of format that's not just these 2 videos, which this one's going to be a bummer to watch, but yeah, but I really do appreciate it. Thank you so much for your time this morning. Thank you, Zoom. Oh, yeah. Oh, wait, there's one quick announcement.
Let me have your attention really quick. That's okay. I did want to bring your attention that we will have a Sunday school class next week. It's been announced in the bulletin, but you need to prep for it. So we're going to engage with Ted Grimsrud, who's the professor of peace theology at Eastern Mennonite. He's going to join us via Zoom. He wrote a blog post a few weeks ago on the war in Ukraine and how to view that from a pacifist theology. And so what I'm inviting you to do is actually read the blog post this week. Send me questions, because he's not going to present. He's simply going to answer questions that we have. So I'd like to get some questions to start, but then we'll have a time to engage. You can be here, you can be on Zoom as well, but please join us. Thanks.
Thank you, Joe. Bye, Zoom.
Hi, Bruce and Kathy. And all the rest of you too.